A Song for Silas by Lori Wick. Chapter 18. Silas stood over the basin in the kitchen and scrubbed at the paint on his right hand with a small brush. It felt as though he were removing more skin than paint. He figured he could take more time tomorrow and use some turpentine, so he put the brush down and finished washing up for supper. Silas had already helped Grant to the table, and he and Amy were waiting patiently for Silas to sit down. Grant's spirits, which were already high, soared when Silas told him he had finished the back of the house and would concentrate on the trim the rest of the week. They talked about the painting, which could be started next week if the good weather held. They talked about the planting, which could be started next week if the good weather held. Grant could see that Silas was starving, so he took pity on him and held his conversation for dessert. Silas was on his second piece of cake when Grant said, "I'd like you to head into town this week, no later than Thursday. There are a few things you'll need for next week. Even if we get rained out of our plans, I'll feel better when we have what's on that list." "That's fine. Amy, do you need something from town?" "Yes, about 6 items if you think you'll have time." "I'm sure I will." He smiled, and Amy smiled back. As the day progressed, the two of them seemed to be back on old terms, warm, friendly, and a bit teasing. After Silas thanked Amy for the meal and complimented her cooking, he turned to Grant. "Grant, where would you like to be?" Silas asked the older man, able to tell he was not at all taxed from this time at the supper table as he usually was. "I thought you'd never ask," Grant said with a twinkle in his eye. "I'd like to go into the living room and listen to my daughter play the piano." "Well, do I have anything to say about this?" Amy said with a teasing tone. She, too, could see that her father was in fine form this evening. "Nope, you don't. You just do as you're told, or I'll see you out to the woodshed." "But, Dad," Amy said with a laugh, "we don't have a woodshed." "I know, but we did when I was a kid, and that thread always worked on me." Silas wondered, as he settled back on the couch, if he could ever grow tired of hearing Amy play. Not likely, he was sure. The window near the piano was open, and Silas watched as the breeze lifted a strand of her golden blonde hair. With the lanterns turned high, her hair shone with health and cleanliness. As he continued to watch her, he remembered how good she had smelled as he'd passed her in the kitchen, like spring flowers and fresh air. Amy looked up then, and smiled at her dad, and then Silas. Silas's breath caught in his throat at her beauty. Even as special as she had been as a child, Silas would never have dreamed she would grow into such a beautiful young woman. Talented, loving, giving, godly. Really, all the things a man would want in the woman he loved. Between one heartbeat and the next, Silas Cameron fell head over heels in love with Amy Nolan. Silas sat frozen as his heart thundered painfully in his chest. "I'm in love with her," he thought in wonder. Silas, having thought of himself as just a big brother, a friend, and a confidant, sat looking at Amy in stunned disbelief. He realized it had been coming for a while. He had labeled it protectiveness, and the special way a brother felt for his little sister. But it was love. Now he knew why he could listen to her playing forever, because he wanted to be with her forever. He wanted her for his wife. This joyful realization lasted only seconds. Amy thought of him as a big brother. At one time, this was special beyond words, but a big brother was the very last thing he wanted to be to Amy right now. Despair quickly set in as Silas remembered Amy had said she planned to never marry. Silas looked quickly away from Amy. He was afraid she would glance over and see in his eyes all that he was feeling. Silas's heart nearly stopped as he averted his eyes from Amy only to have them lock with Grant's. Grant's look was one of compassion and understanding. "He knows," Silas realized. "He knew even before I did." Amy ended the number just then, and Grant quickly spoke up. "I think I'm ready to turn in now, Amy. Thank you, honey, you played beautifully." The two men went alone to Grant's room, and Silas saw Grant settled in for the night. Silas turned to leave, but Grant caught his arm. Silas had been avoiding the older man's eyes. He wanted desperately to be alone with his newfound feelings. But with Grant's hand holding him, he had little choice. Grant said not a word as Silas's eyes met his. He held the young man with his eyes as well as his hand for a long moment. Whatever he had been searching for in Silas's face he must have found, for he slowly nodded his head in silent approval and bid Silas good night. Silas's good night to Amy was hasty. He had to escape to his room. He wasn't the least bit tired, but the need to be alone was overpowering. It was long into the night before he slept.